Thanks for talking mule deer with Steve Belinda and Jody Stemler. The Mule Deer Foundation is the only conservation group in North America dedicated to restoring, improving, and protecting mule deer and black-tailed deer and their habitat. MDF is a strong voice for hunters in access, wildlife management, and conservation policy issues. To find out more, visit www.muledeer.org and stay tuned for the next episode of Talkin' Mule Deer. This is Talkin' Mule Deer with your hosts Steve Belinda and Jody Stemler. Talkin' Mule Deer takes you on a journey to learn more about the Mule Deer Foundation, mule deer and black-tailed deer biology and management, tips and tactics for hunting, conservation issues, and even features some of our corporate and celebrity partners. Now, let's start talking mule deer. Hey, this is Jody Stemler.
And I'm Steve Belinda. Welcome back to another edition of Talkin' Mule Deer. Today we're going to be talking
we haven't
Nevada.
Been here for a while. You've been hunting a lot.
Hunting season.
That's what it is for sure. But we've got some great guests here. Why don't you introduce them, Steve?
Yeah, so we're going to be talking with some folks from Nevada. We've got Director of the Division of Wildlife, Tony Wasley, and we have his Game Division Administrator, Mike Scott. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Morning, Steve. Hey, Jody.
Hey guys, how you doing? Thank you so much for taking time to visit with us. Obviously, Nevada is a huge mule deer state, and I know you guys have a lot. Tony, we've had you on the podcast before, but now we need to call you El Presidente. You are the president of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies for this year, too, are you not?
That is true.
Rumors have it.
Yeah, I wasn't going to reveal that part. But yeah, thank you for acknowledging that. Yeah.
Well, and that's a pretty important role because that's involved. That's the leading the organization, overseeing all of the state fish and wildlife agencies' engagement and working that way. So, congratulations to you on that. That's a big deal.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's truly an honor to represent all the state wildlife agencies in that regard, and have the opportunity to share some of my own thoughts and visions with that association and represent the full state and provincial membership.
Well, congrats, Tony. And we always like talking to you because you're an old deer elk guy that's come up through the ranks and is now in the leadership position. We've worked with you a long time with in the state of Nevada and with Mule Deer Working Group at WAFA. So we're not going to ask you for a little bit of your background because we've already covered that in previous episodes. But Mike, I know that this role for you is fairly new. Why don't you give us a little bit of your history and what really drives your passion for your work there in Nevada?
Thank you. Yeah, I've actually been around Nevada Department of Wildlife for quite a while. I started working seasonally in 1986 and started on the Guzzler crew in Southern Nevada, the Water Development Project in 1989. Was on that for a couple of years, and then I moved into they moved the project to the Northern Nevada, and we worked on chukar guzzlers for about 6 or 8 years there. And in 1999, I moved down to Pioche, Nevada, southeastern Nevada, and I was the game biologist there for about 15 years, and had some changes in my life and ended up moving to Reno as a supervising biologist, and I was there for a few years, and I was considering retiring, and Tony and Jack asked if I would consider sticking around for a few more years as the chief of game. So I've done that, and I never realized the challenges that I would face as the chief of game. I loved being a game biologist. It was awesome, and the chief of game is a little bit more of a challenge, but it's truly an enjoyable job, and I appreciate the opportunity.
It's a challenge and a great thing that we've got fantastic biologists, but you end up becoming an administrator and you don't get to do what you love to do, which is spend time out on the ground. So tell us a little bit about some of your priorities and the work that you're doing, your Mule Deer Initiative work and things like that there in Nevada.
Yeah, we through my career, we've had great success with bighorn sheep and elk and antelope. partly due to some habitat changes in Nevada, but those habitat changes have also really resulted or helped result in a long-term decline in mule deer numbers. And I just felt, before I ended my career, that I would like to at least move the game division towards prioritizing some projects and doing work for mule deer. And we created an oversight committee a little more than a year ago. Some really highly respected um, uh, scientists and consultants and sportsmen, number of wildlife commissioners, and then we created 14 teams around the state, subcommittees, if you will, that um, we've asked them to identify limiting factors for mule deer in their respective areas, and then suggest projects to address those limiting factors. And last night we had a meeting where a lot of those projects were submitted. We ended up with a total of 34 projects on a statewide level that we began talking about last night, and some of them are big projects and some of them are smaller projects, but I believe they were asking for about $2.6 million worth of work to be focused on mule deer. So
that's statewide, or was that
that's statewide?
Yeah.
Yes. So
a lot of opportunity.
Anyway, I'm excited about this project. I'm re-energized, and I really want to see it succeed. So we're working on that.
What types of projects were identified? That give us some of the scopes of some of the issues that they're seeing in the state.
Yeah, some of them are like sagebrush rehabilitation type projects, habitat projects. Some of them are pinyon juniper removal projects. There's spring fencing projects. There are a lot of mule deer collaring projects, and then there's a number of predator removal projects that were proposed. So, and I think there was even one project that was a signage project in a really high density mule deer winter range that is just making people aware that at that time of year mule deer are sensitive to people walking around. So it kind of varied. It varies in different parts of the state, and in central Nevada we have a lot of pinyon juniper invasion, and then in northern Nevada we've had a lot of fires that have reduced habitat. So it varies across the state, but it's there was a lot of really good projects, and a lot of people were pretty pleased with the projects that were moved forward.
Jody, when I hear Mike talk about those projects, it gets us excited here at MDF because, those are the things that we can really help with. We can, we raise funding through our local chapter events and our banquets and Gunapaloozas and Beers for Deers. We also have grant making and other philanthropy efforts that we can then turn around and put money on the ground in those already identified projects that the state has done all the work on. A good example of that is, the Tawano Mountain project that we did last year. We received some funding from Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's Outdoor Fund. We worked with our staff, Randy Morrison, and our local chapter out of, I think it was Elko, to figure out whether we could combine some money. We worked with the Division of Wildlife's local biologist who had a project going on some BLM lands for juniper reduction, and we were able to take $20,000 of Bass Pro Shop money, combine it with $20,000 of local chapter rewards money, give that $40,000 to the Nevada Heritage Account Outdoor Fund, and actually $160,000 came out the door to the project. So that leverage in that approach really allowed us to get about 300 extra acres done on that project without MDF having to get in there and do the soup to nuts project planning implementation. And so it emphasizes to us that partnerships are great, and building on existing opportunities and the work that the state and the federal agencies are already done with the approach that we can bring at MDF can be a great successful model.
Yeah, and just for we've talked about this in other podcasts, but pinyon juniper are obviously they're native species. They've been on the landscape for years, but because of fire suppression, they have started to spread back and more densely into sagebrush rangelands. Is that correct? And these are important wintering areas for mule deer. They're important for sage grouse, and removing some of the invasive newer pinyon and juniper trees helps to restore those sagebrush habitats, make sure that the bunch grasses are there and there's plenty of forage and forbs on the ground. I'm assuming that's all still the same there for Nevada. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen the same exact issues, especially through central Nevada, but even in parts of northern Nevada, pinyon juniper expansion really tends to limit mule deer habitat as well as other species, sage grouse in particular. But yeah, so I'm being down in southeastern Nevada. It's really dense pinyon juniper. So I'm very interested in doing pinyon juniper projects.
Excellent. And I think we were going to be doing some more work there in the Towanos again this year. We do have to take a break to hear from our supporters. So we'll be back in just a few minutes and talk a little bit more, Tony, about some of the migration corridor and habitat connectivity work that you've been very involved in, both at the state and the national level.
Elk, sheep, big old muleys. Not a problem for the 27 Nosler. We packed it with more downrange punch than the 300 Win Mag. We designed it to be flatter shooting than the 6.5 PRC. The 27 Nosler is everything you've heard, all that you've asked for, and plenty more. So enough talking. Check out the numbers for yourself and see what makes the 27 Nosler such a beast at nosler.com.
All right, we're back. Thank you guys for waiting us out, and thank you to our supporters. Tony, before we left on our break, we asked about some of the migration corridors. You have been a leader through the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, working with the Department of the Interior, all of the Western states on big game migration corridors policy, as well as implementing projects. Tell us a little bit more about your involvement there, and then what you all have done at the state level on that.
Well, thanks for the question, Jody. This is one of those issues that I think has long been either misunderstood or underappreciated. And with the increase in technology, some of the technological advancements in GPS collaring technology, we've learned just how important habitat connectivity is. We've learned just how tied to these corridors, many of these animals are, and we've been able to better delineate, where these animals go, when they go, where they stop, and really brought some not only unique technologies, but some of the analytical tools, from some of our friends in the academic institutions to better understand this. And so it's been a growing realization, and with that has come some opportunities. And so during the last presidential administration, Secretarial Order 3362 from Secretary Zinke at the time really highlighted the importance of migration corridors in some western states, and three key species were part of that, and mule deer, elk, and pronghorn. And so subsequent to that, been a great deal more energy, effort, conversation, and some unique funding opportunities as well. And that momentum that was created has carried over into the current administration. And there's a great deal of work ongoing throughout the Western U.S. and a growing appreciation for animals that might go in excess of 100 miles to get from one seasonal range to another, summer range to winter range, et cetera, and the importance of having that connected habitat. So I'm super appreciative of that secretarial order and much of the work that's happened as a result of it, and continue to be excited about our opportunities to work with our land management agencies, as Steve said at the top of the show, and how reliant we are on those relationships. In our state of Nevada, it's 85% federally administered. And so if we don't have our federal land management agency partners on board, things like movement corridors, then it's oftentimes the wildlife that would pay the price.
Now, Tony, one of the things I've seen, two things. One is sort of a funny anecdote. It seems like every state's trying to beat out their brethren states who has the longest migration corridors. Every time we see a new bunch of data, we seem to be finding these almost triple digit migration corridors for multiple species. And I think that's pretty cool to watch. But really, we've seen some of the federal direction then come down into the state level administration. And I know you guys have had an executive order signed recently by the governor. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is kind of in one of those, I guess, byproducts of that secretarial order, where through increased awareness, through increased data, and through an understanding of the importance of these corridors, we were able to actually get an executive order, a governor's executive order that has called out the need for a habitat connectivity plan in partnership with the Department of Transportation. And our agency here at Nevada Department of Wildlife has long understood and appreciated the importance of those corridors, and we have a long-standing relationship with our friends over at the Department of Transportation, and we have some really cool overpasses and underpasses, and through trail cameras we've documented their usage by a whole host of species. The intended beneficiaries, and then some ancillary species as well. Everything from predators to domestic animals. But just seeing the importance of those structures, it's nice to have it formalized in an executive order. Those relationships, and the key product mentioned in that executive order is a statewide connectivity plan, which will help us to further advance protection of those corridors, delineation of those corridors, and provide benefits to a whole host of species.
And I would imagine that'll help with your relationships with the Department of Transportation, who, throughout the country oftentimes don't put wildlife on the top page when they're thinking about the issues they have to think about.
Yeah, and I mean, we have a great relationship with our State Department of Transportation, and I think that's why we were able to achieve what we achieved 15, 20 years ago with overpasses and underpasses. And we had some key allies and wildlife advocates, and that's what it's all about, is relationship and partnership. And so in some ways, the executive order, formalizes that and calls out a habitat connectivity plan as a product. But it isn't that kind of partnership with our State Department of Transportation isn't new or unique. So I'd be remiss if I didn't express some appreciation and gratitude for all the wildlife advocates and supporters that we have in our State Department of Transportation.
Now, Tony, I'm going to ask you a question, and this is both for you and Mike. How do you do with Area 51? There's got to be deer out there. There's got to be, other animals out there. Huh?
Yeah, they glow in the dark. There are those, Department of Defense lands that are mostly off limits to us. We do have some agreements in some places to get access for short windows of time, for some bighorn sheep hunting opportunities. But there are a lot of those DoD administered lands, and for good reason, that are off limits. Unexploded ordnance and active bombing, and I don't know, Mike, do you have any thoughts?
We work pretty close with some of those. They actually have biologists that we work with, but it's more related to bighorn sheep, desert bighorn sheep down in that country, and there certainly are mule deer out there, but again, the opportunities to actually go and try to see them or hunt them are extremely limited, if not impossible.
Yeah, well, we certainly understand that. I think Steve was largely talking about the potential for aliens, since we're right around the Halloween time.
Well, yeah. How do we manage those interstellar deer that are moving?
Yeah, that's a whole
planet
different
to planet, hitching a ride on the flying saucers. So.
All right, guys, we have to take another break here, but we talked a little bit about some of the challenges, but there's a handful of other ones that are not necessarily unique to Nevada, but are certainly felt more deeply by Nevada, including feral horses. So when we come back from our break and hearing from our supporters, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the things you guys have been dealing with: feral horses, your drought, increasing fires that you guys have been dealing with recently. So thanks. We'll take a break and hear from our supporters. For 3 generations and over 75 years, Weatherby has remained dedicated to excellence and innovation in producing quality rifles, shotguns, and ammunition. With 15 cartridges and unmatched ballistic superiority, know that nothing shoots flatter, hits harder, or is more accurate. Carry a Weatherby on your hunt of a lifetime and know you can depend on it to get the job done. At Weatherby, we exist to do one thing: inspire the dreams of hunters and shooters. To learn more, visit weatherby.com. All right, guys, before the break, we were talking about alien deer, but but we were also about to transition into a handful of the challenges that you all face, some of which are unique. And yeah, feral horses is something I know you guys deal with, not exclusively. There's other states that have them, but you guys, particularly with drought, have been dealing with it substantially more. Tell us a little bit more about what you guys are dealing with and what those challenges are.
Go ahead, Tony.
I guess I'll start. There's two things I think that make Nevada kind of the epicenter. One is just the sheer number of horses, where the overwhelming majority of feral horses reside in Nevada. The other complicating factor is the desert ecosystem. It's a fragile ecosystem. It's not a productive ecosystem, and it did not. Most of the plants within it didn't evolve with under a high disturbance regime, and so the disturbance, the herbivory from the horses, the hoof action from the horses, and the limited water resources all really confound the issues, and it's one of those things that we're in a drought and we keep our fingers crossed and we think, okay, well, we're going to turn the corner, and we get more and more drought. Same thing with feral horse population. You think, oh, we're going to get more gathers, we're going to have more funding, we're going to try to get these numbers in check and get down to appropriate management levels, and it just keeps getting more and more difficult. Horses are more and more numerous. Drought is more and more prevalent. Fires are more and more frequent and larger magnitude. And then invasive species come in after the fires. And it kind of creates the perfect storm of challenges. And in some ways, the longer we wait, the worse it gets. And I think that's part of the impetus behind some of the mule deer enhancement program efforts that Mike instituted. But it's no shortage of challenges, and it goes right back to the relationship with our federal partners that you mentioned at the top of the show, Jody, and how important that is, because we're reliant on those federal partners for the funding and the management of those animals.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a tendency for us to linger on gloom and doom in a lot of these issues right now, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that are caught up on crises and challenges. I think, though, that the proactive work that you and many other states are doing is the positive story that we need to spin, that there are things that can be done. Sorry, Steve, I was going over you there.
No, that's okay. I just, wild feral horses, sorry, almost slipped up there, present a challenge. I know, Tony, you and I have talked about this one-on-one, but, besides the issue with fragile ecosystem, putting more mouths on the landscape that you need to support with forage and space, the territoriality issue that comes along with wild horses or feral horses, sorry, slipped up. And, I have watched them defend water sources from birds, everything that comes around. I've seen stallions stand at water sources and really prevent that water from being utilized. Do you see a lot of that as part of the problem, Mike, or is it really a true habitat, hoof action, eating too much issue?
Well, it's everything. I grew up in Winnemucca, Nevada, northwestern Nevada. And when I was a little boy, we used to go out hunting, and every once in a while you would see a group of wild horses. And at that time, I thought they were neat, but it's the number of them that when they get to be such excessive numbers, they're a lot less special. And
do you have statistics? I'm sorry, just on the appropriate management levels and where you're at. I know there's some, but do you guys have off the top of your head what that? I mean, how much higher you
Yeah,
are?
so we're over 4 times AML, appropriate management level. The AML within the established horse management areas of the state place the state horse population at appropriate management levels to be nearly 12,000. At this point in time, we are in the neighborhood of 50,000. So we are over 4 times what that appropriate
That's
management
a big
level.
difference.
Yeah.
That's a big difference. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Mike. I just wanted to give some perspective on how much more. Because yeah, I think we've all seen wild horse bands, feral horse bands at various times, and thought that is cool. And I am a horse. I ride. I show. But there's a difference, and when they're out there, and it's a competition of resources, and it's not even competition. I mean, it's just how do we properly manage across the system for all the species, in particular those native species that we have on the landscape. And it's not just game species; it's a whole bunch of other desert and
Yeah,
safe steppe.
absolutely. It's everything. And you know, some parts of the state are better managed than others. But you know, I think every team that we received a, a, um, a limiting factor ranking form from listed feral horses as being one of the major problems. But of the 34 projects that we received, not one of them was had anything to do with horses, because you know, we don't have the ability to manage them. And you know, it's largely you know, the BLM offices, but it's even above them, because it's got to come from above. And you know, it's unfortunate, but we're really in a tough spot with the number of horses that are out on the landscape.
Yeah, Congress has really tied agency and states' hands on dealing with some of the issues associated with burro and horse management in the West. And you know, I've said Congress created it. Congress is going to have to fix it. And you know, we've seen how everything's a fight these days on even stuff that has full partisan support. So, um, you know, I don't think it's something that everyone's aware of. We bring it up because it does affect how you guys manage wildlife and mule deer in the desert state. And you know, one of the other things that folks don't realize is the impact of fire and annual invasive species. And we've got to take a break to hear from our supporters. But when we come back, I want to visit a little bit about, you know, how fire really can affect both the magnitude and the type of work that you do for mule deer management.
If you're buying or selling a trophy hunting or fishing property in the western U.S., our friends at St. James Sporting Properties should be your go-to resource. St. James Sporting Properties is more than an elite group of professional ranch brokers. They're also passionate about chasing monster mule deer, highly successful big game hunters, and avid outdoorsmen. When you combine their passion and expertise in the outdoors with their industry-leading marketing program, you're guaranteed to have a first-class experience. For more information, go to the Supporting Partners page on muledeer.org or give St. James Sporting Properties a call today to buy or sell your dream sporting property.
All right, prior to the break, we were talking feral horses. The other issue that I see as someone that tries to raise as much money for the habitat work that gets done is really the effect of wildfire and range fires in a state like Nevada. I'm more familiar with the northern part of the range, the state within the Great Basin, but you guys deal with fire at, you know, the landscape level every year. And tell us a little bit about the challenges, the magnitude, and how that really it drives how you guys look at habitat management and how it can possibly affect how you manage populations of mule deer and other wildlife species.
Yeah, I'll start. You know, when we look at the statistics on fire, we look at the acres, you know, per year, and we look at, you know, through history, we know that we're burning a whole lot more land, and we know the result of that oftentimes is is a habitat that's less favorable for mule deer. And I think those are some of the habitat changes that Mike was referencing when he talked about some of the successes that our agencies had for elk and pronghorn and even sheep to a lesser extent. And I think you know it's pretty easy to do, as Jody said, you know, with the doom and gloom around fires. But I think there's some real silver linings, and that's some of the science in how we not only predict fire, how we come in after the fire, and there's some new chemical tools that will allow us to chemically fallow these areas. And so it extends the biological window that we can be effective in coming in to try to, reseed these areas. We have a native seed strategy where we're trying to work with private landowners and producers and take some of the risk associated with, switching from a traditional crop to a native seed. When we see these big fire years, oftentimes it's we either run out of money or run out of seed, and when seed's short, the cost goes way up, and we don't have a reliable source of seed. So having some of these native seed strategies and having traditional producers kind of shift their operation into native seed production, a lot of potential on the horizon there. So between native seed availability, production, prediction of fire location, and those areas where we're likely to be most successful in either fighting the fire or reestablishing native vegetation, and having some of the chemical tools to chemically fallow these areas, I think we're really moving in the right direction there. Ultimately, we're also doing some green stripping, meaning we use a type of vegetation that's fire resistant, fire tolerant, and plant that around areas of important habitat to protect it from fire, kind of along the lines of, identify the core, protect the core, grow the core. So a lot of adaptation, I guess, to some of the challenges. But, the bottom line is we see way more fire, way bigger fires, way more intense fires, and it is changing our habitats and affecting the number of mule deer that we can carry out there on the landscape.
And Tony, I think that's a really good point. The amount of fire and the size of the fires. We at MDF get a chance to look at the entire West, and when we add up the amount of acres that are burned, and where those locations are and the size of those fires, it almost becomes an enormous task to even figure out where to start. And, Mike, I'm going to throw it to you. How do you figure out, when you have millions of acres that, could be affected by wildfire and annual invasive species and the other issues associated with that, where do you start prioritizing where you can come in and make a difference on restoration, rehabilitation?
Well, a lot of that is going to be limited by the amount of funding that you have, and you have to pick whether it's historic areas that were wintering areas before, excuse me, or places. You have to just seek those opportunities. And last year in 2020, I went on a field trip up to just outside of Battle Mountain to the Eisenhood Mountains. And the Eisenhoods have long been a pretty crucial winter range for Area 6 mule deer. And in the early 90s, that burned, and it was really an annual grassland, cheatgrass monoculture for 20 years. And it was one of these places that I really, really liked when I lived in that country, and spent a lot of time hunting chucker, looking at deer, things like that. And when I went on this field trip, our habitat division, working with our partners, federal partners, BLM, had done some projects in there where they used the chemical fallow that Tony mentioned, imazapic, and then came back and they planted that with both native and some non-native species, particularly forage kochia. And when I went in there, I looked at this place that 20 years ago was a cheatgrass monoculture, and I looked at it. I mean, it brought tears to my eyes. It was amazing to see what has come back from those efforts. And after that field trip, that's when I came back to Tony and I said, we need to start a project to seek funding for both our people and our federal partners to do this kind of work in other places where mule deer habitat has been lost. So that's kind of the nexus of this project, but that's exactly what we want to do, is these places where crucial mule deer, especially wintering habitat, has been lost. those are the places that we want to get back into and do projects. And it depends on the amount of precipitation that areas receive. And no matter what we do, we're still really reliant on Mother Nature to be favorable to, we could spend millions of dollars on a project, and if we don't get favorable precip, it tends to be a lot less successful.
Yeah, one of the things we did, and I know Tony knows all about this because he's heard me talk at many meetings, is, we overlap sage grouse, greater sage grouse habitat and mule deer habitat in a lot of places, and we try to capitalize on the priority that greater sage grouse has been getting throughout the country because of the potential listing underneath the Endangered Species Act. And our former CEO used to say, what's good for the bird is good for the herd, meaning the deer herd, not the cow herd, even though that there is benefits to cow herds and other livestock. And what it allowed us to do, and I've said it on our podcast before, it allows us to approach folks and say, do this work for mule deer rather than for sage grouse, and you can eliminate some of the baggage and negative issues associated with greater sage grouse management. Still get the same work done, but do it for the benefit of a species that most people care about. Whether you hunt mule deer or not, they are the icon of the West. They're representative of healthy rangelands, healthy forest lands, grasslands, and it is something that you can see an immediate benefit because ungulates breed pretty quickly, and you can rebuild a population and get distribution, Mike, as you were just talking, back into areas that were affected years ago, and we can start rebuilding healthy local herds. And we're moving towards that approach, prioritizing our work, prioritizing where we work, who we work with, how we work. We'll be hearing more of that throughout the next year. Underneath Joel Peterson's leadership here at MDF, but it really, I've used the term conservation triage. We can't do it all. We have to figure out where we can have the maximum impact and where we can have a chance to either restore, rehab, or enhance those mule deer habitats, black-tailed deer habitats that are out there. And so, we really look forward to working with you. We're going to take one last break, and when we come back, I want to maybe jump into a little bit more fun things than some of this dry is, how's mule deer season going in Nevada? How are you guys in your tag draws or, your hunts? And, we can swap a little bit of, some fun stuff when we get back. So we're going to hear from our supporters, and we'll be right back.
The best hunting stories begin long before the harvest. They begin with the hard work of conservation groups like the Mule Deer Foundation, working tirelessly to protect our hunting traditions. As a proud partner of MDF, Vortex Optics is dedicated to improving your experience in the field by offering you rugged, innovative optics and apparel backed by our VIP warranty, our unlimited lifetime promise to take care of you whenever you need us. Together, let's ensure mule deer always have a place to roam. The best hunting stories are yet to be told. Learn more at vortexoptics.com.
Okay, coming back. We ask this question a lot. How are mule deer doing in Nevada right now, and how's hunting season going?
Well, we face some challenges with mule deer, but I think our population estimate is slightly below the long-term average. I think we're at about 85,000 deer, which in different times of the 80s we had a lot more deer, but we're still doing pretty well. There are areas that are truly struggling, and that's why we're trying to do projects for the benefit of them. But I've been seeing a lot of people successful on social media, and some really nice deer, which I didn't really expect this year because of how dry it was through the spring.
Now, Tony, putting your ability to draw aside as director, you guys manage more for, you're not a sole opportunity state, right? You guys manage on limited quota, limited entry, more for a quality / opportunity versus just general opportunity. Is that correct?
Yeah, we try to thread that needle, and I think it would probably be more accurate in referring to my draw ability as an inability. But I think what we try to do I think what's foreign to most people is that the entire state of Nevada, across the board, all species, is administered through a draw process. The only thing that even comes close to an over-the-counter type opportunity is mountain lion tags as a big game species. Everything else is on a draw basis, and we definitely have those individuals who would define themselves as opportunity meat hunters. They want to hunt every year. They want to put meat in the freezer, and we have the other end of the continuum. People that say, "Oh, I'm a trophy hunter. I don't care if I have to wait 5 or 6 years to have the opportunity to kill a 30-inch buck or whatever that is." And so it's difficult to meet both those expectations. And some of the ways we try to do that, historically, we've looked at split seasons where maybe we would have a shorter season at a hot, dry time of the year where we know we would have low hunter success to accommodate some of those opportunity hunters that want to hunt every year, and then have a later, longer season with fewer people in a late season where maybe there would be some weather and moving closer to rut. But it's really tough because every area is one person's opportunity area and another person's trophy area. And so we have a continuum of expectations, and you can't manage every area the same. And so we try to thread that needle, but we do take a lot of pride in the quality of the experience, the number of animals that people see when they're in the field. And to Mike's point, it's crazy to me. You looking on social media, you'll have some threads where people are talking about, oh, we need to close the season altogether for 2 or 3 years and let all these deer grow up. And then you see pictures of all these 12 and 13-year-old boys and girls that have these, giant bucks. And you wonder how the 12 and 13-year-old little boys and girls are able to do that, but there's other people that want to close the emergency closure for 5 years. So you can't make everybody happy, but we darn sure try to.
Now, Tony, I would be remiss not to talk about the statewide mule deer tag that we sell for the state of Nevada every year at our Western Hunting and Conservation Expo. And Jody, I got it right. Tell us a little bit about that, and what kind of funds does that generate, and where do those funds go?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier in leveraging. Mike kind of mentioned it in terms of looking for funding to do some of those like chemical fallowing and historic deer restoration programs. But that those auction tags generate the primary source of funding for our habitat efforts. It's also leveraged 3 to 1. So for every dollar that tag generates, we can leverage that to at least 3 federal dollars, and then bring in other partners as well. So it's critical to our operation, our post-fire re-veg efforts. And interestingly, in Nevada, state law that enabled that program requires that 100% of those tag proceeds come back to the state. So it isn't the Mule Deer Foundation that's trying to get fat on the sale of auction tags. That money comes right back to the department and then is leveraged through federal funds or partner funds, 3 to 1 or more, to do good things on the ground for wildlife, and mule deer are a huge beneficiary of that. And we've seen that program just grow and grow and grow. And we've added the Silver State tag, which is an opportunity for everyone. And so there's some pretty good revenue coming into that account, and it's funding some tremendous projects and to huge benefit to a number of species.
Yeah, we mentioned that because a lot of folks think that it's just taking the money and run, but really, all the tags that MDF does, on average, about 90% of it goes back to the field, to the state, and to the ground. And those places where we don't get to keep any, we're proud to sell those tags, try to generate the maximum amount of income and resources back to the habitat work, the conservation of mule deer. We've got to wrap up here, guys. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Nevada is one of those states with MDF. We don't have a regional director that's based in Nevada. We use a couple of our adjacent regional directors to cover it, and that's basically due because you're the 7th largest state with 2 population centers and a whole lot of nothing in between. So it makes it really tough to have a full-time staffer there, but we've had successful partnership with y'all. We're getting money to the ground, and I think, Tony, as you and I talked with last week, we're looking forward to strengthening the partnership, expanding our opportunities, particularly with the effort that Mike's leading with these 14 teams out there identifying the places and the things that should be done for mule deer.
Cool, guys. Well, thank you guys very much for what you're doing. Actually, I am getting ourselves packed up because my daughter's buck tag is this weekend. So we are heading out tomorrow to see if she can connect before she has to get back to school again on Monday. So very limited window. Fingers crossed on that. I hope you all have some time out in the field or hunting out ahead of you still this season. Appreciate all the time. Until next time, this is Jody Stemler.
And I'm Steve Belinda, and thank you for talking mule deer.
Thanks for talking mule deer with Steve Belinda and Jody Stemler. The Mule Deer Foundation is the only conservation group in North America dedicated to restoring, improving, and protecting mule deer and black-tailed deer and their habitat. MDF is a strong voice for hunters in access, wildlife management, and conservation policy issues. To find out more, visit www.muledeer.org and stay tuned for the next episode of Talkin' Mule Deer.